Hello, my amazing students. I am so excited for you because today you are going to get the best advice to become fluent fast. But this advice isn't coming from me. This advice is coming from expert polyglots and successful language learners. And they're going to share with you their best language learning secrets, how to become fluent faster, and mistakes to avoid. Welcome back to Jforrest English. Of course, I'm Jennifer. Now let's get started. First, we'll hear from famous polyglot Steve Kaufmann, who has learned over 20 languages, and he's going to share his best advice with you. So Steve, you're a polyglot who speaks 20 languages. What's your secret to learning languages?
First of all, I have to caution you. When I say 20, I have learned 20 at different times to varying degrees. I can't say that I'm totally fluent in 20 languages. I could easily switch into, say, a dozen of them, and others I would have to refresh, or I'm in the process of learning. And the secret is to enjoy the process, to simply not worry about how well I'm doing, what mistakes I make, just expose myself to the language. Every so often when I'm curious, I might look up something related to grammar, some explanation, but I don't focus on explanations. I focus on getting the language into me through a lot of listening and reading.
Well, 12 languages is still extremely impressive. Now, do you think that anyone can become a polyglot, or are some people just more naturally gifted when it comes to learning languages?
I think that potentially anyone can become a polyglot. The more languages you learn, the easier it becomes to learn new languages. So the most difficult language is your first foreign language because you've never done it before. You don't know how to go about it. You're not confident. And I think that as you learn more languages, those parts of your brain that deal with acquiring new languages, they become more, adept at doing it. So I think anyone can do it. They have to be motivated, they have to put in the time, and they get better and better at it. But for most people, I think learning one or two languages is enough. It just so happens that I, for a variety of reasons, got interested in learning many languages.
And you mentioned motivation. If you had to boil down the qualities or personality traits of successful language learners, what would you say those are?
Well, obviously, motivation is big. The motivation, I would say attitude is big. So motivation is one thing, confidence, enjoying the language learning process. All of those things are part of that positive attitude. And I also think it's very important not to be a perfectionist, very important to accept, fuzziness, incertitude, you don't quite understand. You keep forgetting the same words, and all of that is fine because you're enjoying the process of discovering another language.
And you mentioned confidence. I'm going to ask you a follow-up because many of my students tell me that they lack confidence when using their English. So can you speak a little bit more about the role that confidence has when learning and using a foreign language?
Confidence is huge. And that's why I put a great amount of emphasis on listening and reading. And you sometimes hear people say, well, I can read, but I have trouble speaking. But most of those people don't realize just how much you need to read and listen. Like you have to read a book, 200, 300 pages, one book, several books. And the brain starts to get used to the language. And reading is so easy to do. And when we read, it's almost as if we're speaking because we are sort of subconsciously vocalizing as we read, and also listening. And so if you build up this degree of confidence with the language, the brain is used to the language, the brain has formed a model of the language. When you go to speak, of course you're going to struggle at first, but you will gradually improve because you have all these words inside you. So I think part of it is being better prepared. Most people don't put the time and effort into reading and listening. They desperately try to remember some grammar rules, and they try to think of grammar rules while they're speaking, which is hopeless. And then they have to accept that when they're speaking, they're actually practicing speaking, and they will gradually get better. And while they're speaking, if they're speaking to people that matter to them, they're getting very valuable input, which is also all part of training the brain to be comfortable in the language.
So it's all about input and understanding that all the different things that we're doing when we're learning a language contribute to that input.
Well, exactly. Now, obviously, if you have an opportunity for output, for speaking or for writing, you want to take advantage of it. And you want to do it without worrying about mistakes, just trusting your impulses. But we don't necessarily, unless we live where the language is spoken, we don't always have a lot of opportunity to speak with people. We should speak whenever we can, but we don't always have that opportunity. But it's very easy to organize listening, very easy to organize reading. And you know, some people say, well, how can I read if there's so many words that I don't know? Well, that's part of, we have Link as an example, but if you're reading online, you have online dictionaries. It's so easy nowadays to work on getting your vocabulary up to where eventually you can read books on paper, which is the ultimate sort of milestone when you read your first book from cover to cover. And all of that is part of getting you in a place where you're comfortable speaking.
And coming back to that place of getting comfortable speaking, when I'm working with students, and I'm sure all my students watching can relate to this question, when I'm working with students, the number one concern that they have is that they don't feel confident speaking. They feel like they're being judged by native speakers. They're worried about their grammar mistakes. They're worried that their accents are too thick. And all of this prevents them from speaking confidently. So what advice would you give to these students?
Okay, well, you mentioned several things there. First of all, thick accent. As long as you are comprehensible, your accent is fine. We have to accept that. Obviously, if we can get closer to sort of native pronunciation, we have to want to in a way. We want to imitate the way the natives speak, but we have to realize, and I realize, that I will never be mistaken for a native speaker in the languages that I have learned. So accept the fact that you have an accent. Also, accept the fact that you're going to forget. I mean, we know if I'm in some place and somebody shows up whom I know, but what's his name or her name, the more pressure I put on myself to try to remember that person's name, the more likely I am not to remember. And later on, when there's no pressure on me, oh yeah, that was George or Sally. So obviously there is a certain amount of pressure, tension when we speak, because it's always more comfortable to speak in your own language. So you're speaking in another language, there's a little more tension, and so it's a little more difficult to remember things. We just have to accept that. All of that is normal. It's normal not to understand. It's normal to forget. And if we simply keep going, we will gradually improve. The more pressure we put on ourselves, or if we try to avoid speaking because we're afraid, then we aren't going to improve. So, I mean, it's easy to say, but I have experienced it in many languages where I struggle. And sometimes we think we did more poorly than we in fact did. And we just have to give ourselves credit. Trust the brain. The brain will gradually learn given enough experience. And you just have to keep going.
And of course, you're very active in the polyglot community. Now, I'm curious, what would a polyglot think about making a mistake? When a polyglot is learning or using one of their languages, what do they think when they make a mistake?
I think the one common trait to the polyglots that I've met is that they aren't concerned. They accept uncertainty. They accept uncertainty. That's it. If you want to be totally safe and comfortable, you don't learn another foreign language. Once you are learning another foreign language, you are now into this territory where there are going to be mistakes and there's going to be things you don't understand and things that you don't pronounce properly. And people say, I beg your pardon, what did you say? And that's all part of the territory. And polyglots accept this. I've been to a number of polyglot conferences. And by the way, the overwhelming majority of polyglots grew up in unilingual families. So the idea that somehow polyglots are people who grew up with a Spanish-speaking mother and a French-speaking father or whatever, that's not true. The polyglots are people who got interested, who are confident that they can learn, and who accept the fact that fuzziness and not understanding and forgetting is all part of learning another language.
And we've already talked about the mistakes that students make when they're learning a language, but what would you say are the biggest mistakes that language learners make?
Well, the biggest, so not specifically with reference to English, but I think this desire to be perfect. I got to sound like a native. I've got to, get, just the right tense. It doesn't matter. Like tense is a big item for people learning English. And honestly, whether you say, in many situations, it's optional. You can go, I go, or I am going, I went, I was going. Very often it doesn't matter. It may matter on a grammar test, but in reality, there are a lot of tenses in English, probably more tenses than we need. And so if you just go with the simple whatever, the simple present, the simple past, in many cases that's going to work. Don't try to be perfect. Don't, when speaking, try to think through your grammar rules. That's not going to work. You have to sort of have an attitude that you're going to develop certain habits in the language, and you're going to trust those habits. And when you speak, it's going to come out. And you will pick up on what other people are saying. And if there are sort of rough edges, if you have an open mind, gradually those rough edges will become, less frequent. So I think a big mistake is to expect that right now I'm as good as I'm ever going to be. No, right now you're in the process of improving. So keep going and you'll get better.
Sounds like exactly what you said about attitude being one of the most important personality traits.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Attitude. There are two things in language learning, attitude and time. So the attitude portion of it is, you like the language, you want to learn, you enjoy the learning process. That's difficult to do. You can't force yourself to like something. However, you can force yourself to get active. So if your attitude is, I'm not that keen on, say, English, if it's English, and I've looked around for, TV programs or things that I might get interested in, or cooking shows, or the thing is, try to find something that interests you and vary it. So you're onto something that relates to business, something that relates to history, that relates to cooking shows, gardening, whatever, a variety of content. Try to get interested and then put in the time. It takes time. It takes time. So I see immigrants to Canada, for example, who go home at night and they only watch television programs in their own language. Okay, that's relaxing maybe, but that's not going to help you. You have to be willing to put in a lot of time. Not only, let's say, classroom time, but also if you're, in the evening, especially if you live in Canada or the United States, watch local television. Put the time in with engage with the language. So attitude and time.
And speaking about putting in the time, when you're learning a language, is there ever an end point when you say, yep, learn that language and you move on? Or do you feel like learning is more of a process and you'll always be learning a new language?
Yeah, we're always more comfortable in our own language. Although there are people who, let's say again, immigrants who genuinely learn the language, who work in English, who have friends with whom they speak English, who always have a bit of an accent, and they've kind of reached the point where it's more than good enough. And in many cases, even say immigrants who speak with an accent may in fact use the language better than many native speakers. So they're at a stage where they're as good as it's going to get. But by and large, it's always an unfinished process. If I say that I speak 20 languages, even the languages that I speak very well, like French or Japanese, I can always get better. I can always get better. So we're never, it's never completed. It's an ongoing process.
Now, previously you said that it's normal to forget your words. For example, in our native language, we might be having a conversation and we forget the name of a restaurant, even though we went to that restaurant last week, and that's just normal. But this is a concern that my students have because they tell me that every time they go to speak, they forget all their words, even simple words that they know really well. When they're speaking, their mind goes blank and they forget their words. Do you have a strategy for overcoming this when you're learning languages?
You have to remember, first of all, very often you hear people talk about, I'm going to master the basics. We forget even the most basic words. We forget the most basic structures. We forget things that we used to be able to do and now we can't do all of a sudden. We may be able to do it the next time. So the first thing is to accept that. That is absolutely normal. And it's part of the process of communicating. But gradually, even the process of forgetting and relearning is solidifying that capability in your brain. Research into the brain, we need to see something, notice something, forget it for a while, go back to it, forget it again, go back to it. And slowly, that is how we accumulate words that we can comfortably use. So forgetting is part of the process and shouldn't make us feel uncomfortable. We say, good, I forgot, good, and now I relearn it. And maybe I forget it again, good, and then I relearn it. And gradually, we improve.
That's an amazing attitude to have. By forgetting, you are in fact learning. Not only is it normal to forget things, but it's beneficial. So changing your attitude around it. I hope all my students remember that lesson. What a powerful lesson. Now, Steve, you've shared so many lessons so far, but if my students were to only do one thing this week to help them improve their fluency in English, what should they do?
Well, it's not one thing. I would say, put in the time, which in most cases is going to mean input activities because that's easy to organize. I carry my iPhone with me. I use Link. I've got my lessons there. I can listen to them. I have a playlist. If I'm sitting in the doctor's office, I can look up words and read something. So I'm engaging with the language in that way. So wherever you have an opportunity, input. However, when you have an opportunity to output, to speak, absolutely take advantage of it and don't worry about how you do. And trust your instincts. Come out with whatever you got. That's what you have. Let it come out. Interact with people. You'll get some feedback and you just keep going. So input activities wherever you have the opportunity and output activities wherever you have the opportunity.
Amazing advice. Thank you so much for sharing that, Steve. I'm sure all my students have learned a lot already. And you share a lot of resources on your YouTube channel. You have an amazing app that you've developed called Link. So can you quickly tell my students how they can find you, how they can learn more about Link as well?
Okay, so my YouTube channel is called Lingo Steve, all one word. And I put a video out once a week on different aspects of language learning. I even speak in different languages, Japanese, French, Chinese, you name it. And Link, LINGQ.com, is a website that my son and I developed, which is where I learn languages. And it basically enables people to use the resources of the internet. You can import YouTube videos, you can import ebooks. There's stuff in our library with a lot of repetitions for people getting started. And there's a bunch of functionality there to help you learn words and phrases. So certainly that's what I like to use, but it doesn't matter. People can do whatever they want to do as long as they put in the time and they have a positive attitude.
Well, you heard it, everyone. Put in the time, have a positive attitude. Thank you so much, Steve. It's truly been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Such amazing advice. Let's show our appreciation and put thanks Steve in the comments. Put thanks Steve in the comments. Now let's move on and hear from polyglot Luca Lamparello, who has learned 15 languages, and he's going to reveal his best secrets to you.
Hello, Luca. Thank you so much for being here on my channel.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So you're a polyglot. Why don't you tell everyone, how many languages do you speak?
So when people ask me how many languages I speak, I always reply that I've been learning 15 languages and I am functional in 10 or 11, meaning that if you ask me at the drop of a hat to have a conversation with you right now, I would be able to hold a conversation and more in 10 to 11 languages. But I've been learning 15 in my language learning career, so to speak.
Well, I know a lot of people on my channel struggle with learning one language, so that's an amazing accomplishment. Now, just so everyone knows, English is not your native language. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. My native language is Italian. I was born and raised in Italy.
Okay. Can you quickly summarize your experience with learning English as a second language?
Sure. So first, doom and gloom and desperation at school. I started learning English when I was 10 in middle school. And then at the ripe age of 12, my teachers decided to hire an American tutor, Susan from Chicago. And that changed everything because until then, I could not even pronounce the word enough. I used to say inaug because Italians are notoriously like we tend to read in Italian, you speak as you write. So, but in English, which is it's not a phonetic language, it's completely different. And then she changed everything because I moved from having to do homework for school and with a relatively, let's say, unpleasant English teacher to watching movies, having interesting and meaningful conversations with Susan, who used to record, movies for me back in the day. We didn't have the internet. And I started having fun. I started realizing that I could learn English by myself, and all those limiting beliefs that I had, both self-imposed and imposed by society, then just melted like snow. And that's the moment where everything changed at 12. And then, I started learning more and more by myself, starting reading books, starting watching more and more, movies. And then I went abroad to Ireland for the first time. And I remember that people call me the American in the neighborhood. And I was very proud of that because just 3 years prior, I could not even string a sentence together. And then in the course of the last, I would say, over the last 20, 30 years, I've been using English a lot with my friends. And, I've been living with the English language. I've been learning English and using English a lot. So now I think I speak it decently.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure all my students would agree. And so for you, it seems like the moment that things change is when you went from a language learning approach that you didn't enjoy to one that you did enjoy. Is that how you apply the same approach to learning your other languages?
Yeah, let's put it this way, that the shift was both in terms of techniques, but mostly in terms of mindset, because I suddenly realized that I could actually learn English. Now, one thing that really happens with most students who've never learned another foreign language successfully is that they don't actually believe that they can do it. And this reminds me of the time when at the ripe age of 7, I was on the seat of a bike and I tried to ride the bike for the first time. And I remember the frustration. I ended up in tears that day, and my father telling me, just be patient and you will learn how to ride the bike. Then when that magically happened after a few days of trying, I started believing that I could actually ride a bike, and then I started riding a bike. Same thing happens when we acquire a skill like learning a language. Until you've reached fluency in a language, there's always this nagging thought that maybe you're not good enough, that maybe you were not bitten by the polyglot bug or blessed by the gods, the language gods, and you don't have talent. But the reality is that every single person on this planet can learn a foreign language, any foreign language for that matter, if they already speak their own native language fluently. The problem is that, unfortunately, within the education system is we have it backwards, unfortunately. So people tend to learn in a very inefficient way, and they come to the conclusion that it's their fault, that they're not good enough. How many times do we have these limiting beliefs? So I think that what really changed for me was the fact that I started believing, like Susan brought about this revolution. In terms of techniques, yes, that was important also to discover the joy of learning. But I think the real shift was psychological more than technical, so to speak. But then, the combination of the psychological change and the adopting techniques and strategies and activities that I really liked, this combination worked wonders for me. That's the real difference, game changer, as they say.
I'm happy you mentioned that because I do receive a lot of comments, emails from students, and they're just frustrated. They say, Jennifer, I've been learning English for 10 years, 15 years. I've been living in North America for 25 years and I'm still struggling with my English. And I can tell there's a lot of frustration in those messages I get. So how can these students change that belief if they've had it for 10, 15 years or even longer? Do you have any advice for them?
So, first of all, I believe that we all have limiting beliefs about what we can do and we cannot do, but the past does not have to define our future, in the sense that, yes, it did happen. Like maybe you still finding it difficult to speak English, even if you live in the United States or England or any English-speaking country. I do believe, though, that first of all, it doesn't matter where you live, it matters how you live. If you take, for example, two students, one who lives in the United States and let's say a Spanish-speaking student, one lives in the United States, but always hangs around with other Spanish-speaking people, or when they try to learn English, they get into the same old paradigm of, I'm not sure I can actually learn, they stumble upon their words, etc., etc. And then you take another student who does not live in the United States or any other English-speaking country, but then they spend time listening to podcasts or like having interesting conversations, maybe on Skype, or even meeting English-speaking natives in a bar around the corner, in a language exchange. So first of all, it's how you live, not where. And if then how you live, what you do in your everyday life, and on top of that, you also live in country, so you live in the UK or the US, that's a great combination. But first of all, you have to learn how to use your time properly. That's the very first thing. The second thing I would say is that, again, the fact that you learned poorly before or inefficiently before does not mean that you have to learn poorly for the rest of your life. There's always, like, when is the best time to learn better, more efficiently? It's now. Doesn't matter how old you are. Some people say, I'm 40, I'm 50. You have to learn a language, a foreign language, when you're in your teens if you want to speak it well. It's not true. I recently heard a story of someone who's learned a foreign language in their 60s and learned a foreign language well within 3 years. And recently at my language learning academy, an 80-year-old girl sent me a message, said, Luca, until I was 80, I could not speak Spanish. And now I speak Spanish fluently in a matter of months. So it's never too old. The third thing is, I believe that the main reason why a lot of people, including people who live in the US or live in the UK or whatever, they do not speak well, comes from a number of factors. The first is the belief that they're not good at language learning or they're not good at learning English. That's the first thing. The second thing is that maybe they don't listen or they don't speak enough. They tend to use the same techniques, or they tend to stick to the same paradigms of what they used to do before, meaning maybe they speak a little bit, but they're a little bit timid, they're a little bit shy, and maybe they don't listen enough, they don't watch movies, they don't get immersed in the language. We can talk about this a little bit more in detail, but there's capital and very important things that people have to change if they want to learn a language well. The good news is that nowadays, with the internet, you can do anything you want if you learn how to use the internet correctly, instead of getting sucked in the rabbit hole of, spending time scrolling the whole day. You can engage in meaningful activities learning English. So these are the three important things that you have to take into account that explain why a lot of people do not speak English well, even if they live in the US.
Well, it's very inspiring that you mentioned that woman who's 80 years old and got amazing results, because I know that, of course, is one of the limiting beliefs students have is, oh, I'm too old, I don't have enough time. You hear these beliefs again and again. Now, speaking of mindset, one of the mindset factors I hear from students a lot is just fear, this fear of making mistakes, this fear of being judged, and it prevents them from actually going out there and using their English in the real world. So they spend all their time studying, acquiring vocabulary, but then they don't have the confidence to actually use it. Have you experienced that with yourself or your students, and what advice would you share?
So let me first tell you that this is a very a human thing to be scared of, getting out of your comfort zone. When we get out of our comfort zone, we're always scared. That's the first thing. So it's completely normal to be scared or slightly anxious about the mere fact of having to have a conversation with a native speaker. So that's the first thing to take into account. The second thing to take into account is that I foresee like these three zones. You have the comfort zone at the beginning, right? So that's where you stand, where you're like sitting in the corner, you're learning vocabulary, but you don't want to venture out there and have, talk to people. Then you have there's another layer or zone around that zone, which I call it's called the Goldilocks zone. So it's slightly challenging, but it's not too challenging. I'll give you a concrete example in a second. And then you have the panic zone. The panic zone is where you're completely out of your comfort zone so far that you panic because it's too difficult. An example. So your comfort zone is, let's say, whoever is listening, if you've been learning a language for a little bit and, or for a long time for that matter, English, and you still find it difficult, you still tremble at the idea of speaking to someone, or you're interacting with someone, but you don't express yourself smoothly because your mind goes blank and you think, oh my God, they're judging me, I'm making mistakes, you think about grammar, all those things that make it difficult. Then think about this. Your comfort zone is sitting in front of a computer and making maybe lists of words or maybe watching something passively, right? So that is an excuse of, oh, I'm engaging with the language, but I'm not actually talking to people. Then you have what I call the Goldilocks zone. It's a good zone. It's a good zone to be in. And you tell yourself, okay, I'm scared. Fine, normal. But I could hire a tutor, a very nice and friendly person with whom I could have a conversation. It's a protected environment because whether you're paying someone or you find someone you can have a conversation with, maybe on Skype, there is no background noise. That person knows that you're a learner. And then you can have a conversation. You can prepare beforehand about a topic you're interested in, and you can have a meaningful conversation. That's a gray zone that you can get in, a gray zone, but a good zone to be in so that you can actually step out of your comfort zone progressively. Have a conversation. You realize, oh, that was not a big deal. The person was nice. I stumbled and I grumbled a little bit, but at the end of the day, I made it. And then you have the panic zone. The panic zone is where you get out and say you go and buy something. Let's say I don't know, maybe a train ticket. You go to the station and unfortunately you come across a very grumpy old lady or a guy who are not very happy because of their own reasons, and then they blurt out something you do not understand, and you find yourself in that situation where, oh my gosh, what do I do? Do I reply that I do not understand and look like a fool, or do I nod and I pretend that I understand? These are not easy situations because we think, oh, you just have to buy a ticket, but in real life conversations and interactions, native speakers are not your teachers. They go about their own business. That's the reason why that's a panic zone. So my simple advice is try to build your comfort zone. If you're scared of speaking, the one thing that you have to think about is to find a situation where you find some comfort, a person who's friendly, not necessarily competent, but friendly. Let me say this again because this is very important. People tend to think that when they have to prepare or just interact with someone, they have to find a very competent person who explains the English grammar in detail. That's not true. You need someone to talk to. That's the main point. That person will listen to you, will possibly give you feedback for the mistakes you make, but they don't have to explain grammar to you in detail. Nowadays, you can do that if you want to, but the main goal is to actually speak, to have a conversation. Fluency is not just a matter of how many words you know, how many grammar rules you know, or whether your pronunciation is good or accurate or not. It's a degree of confidence that you build with experiences that you have. And the first experience you can have, nowadays we can because we have the internet, is to have a conversation with someone that you find friendly in a protected environment. That's the first thing that I would do. The second thing that I would do, and that's maybe even more important, is this. The reason why we tend to stumble, we tend to think about grammar, our mind goes blank, is due to something that unfortunately we were all subjected to. Think about, well, you're from the United States, I'm from Italy, but all across the world, the pattern is always the same. At school, we tend to think in terms of performance, not in terms of communication. Children have a great time using foreign languages because learning their own native language. Because they communicate, they have fun. They just don't think, oh, I'll be judged. But adults or adults, what happens is that they go to school, they constantly think, I'm getting a mark. Am I going to get a good mark? Am I going to get a bad mark? So someone, I don't know, the teacher addresses you. You're not thinking about I want to talk about this because I'm so excited. You're thinking, let me try to survive. Let me try to say whatever I can say, but thinking I have to conjugate the verb correctly. I have to say this, that's the problem. And if you start focusing on communication instead of performance, it changes everything. So here's my piece of advice. Whenever you have a conversation, make sure that you prepare something, a topic that you really like, and just talk about that. Get excited. It doesn't matter if you make mistakes or not. The most important thing is you get your point across. If I told you, for example, in English, tomorrow, school, you will understand perfectly. Tomorrow to go to school, you will understand perfectly, even if it's not grammatically accurate, but it's better to say something and make a mistake rather than not saying anything. But this, again, you have to understand and be aware of the fact that the outcome police, it's like, oh, you made a mistake, is there. If you change this, if you have experienced this mind shift, not performance, but communication, it changes everything. One last thing, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I love this. I love this topic. There is a beautiful TED Talk, which is called Teaching English Without Teaching English. I think I wrote it here somewhere. It's by Roberto Guzman. He's a Mexican guy who's teaching Mexican kids to learn to speak English. Beautiful. It talks about all this stuff in his own way, and I think these are universal principles. Focus on communication and not outcome.
You raised so many points. I hope everyone is paying attention because Luca has given you all such amazing advice. And this is something I've seen with my students. They think that when they're communicating with a native speaker, it's the same as communicating with their teacher. They expect to be assessed, judged, corrected. They think it's an appropriate time to think about grammar, correct their mistakes, ask for feedback, when really you're just having a conversation. It's not the appropriate time to do that. So I'm so glad that you raised all those points. And everyone, watch that TED Talk as well. I will watch it myself. I don't believe I have. And you talked specifically about when students forget their words or their mind goes blank, it's because they're entering out of that comfort zone. So it's just more of a natural thing. But I wanted to know if you could expand on that at all or give any more specific advice, because this is one thing that my students ask a lot about. I know the words, I studied this, I know it. But then when I'm in the situation, I open my mouth and it just goes. Do you have any practical strategies to help them remember their words when they need them?
Absolutely. So this happens to me as well. And to go back to your previous question, when you asked me, does this happen to you as well, that you get scared of speaking? Yes, every single time I learn a new language, I am terrified when the moment comes of speaking, even after all so many years, because in my subconscious mind, unfortunately, the influence that school had on me when I was a little kid is still there in the subconscious part of my mind. So now, to answer your question, we're not going to delve into neuroscience, although I'm really passionate about how the brain works. And if you understand how the brain works, it gives you an incredible insight into why we have these problems when speaking a foreign language, or even our own native language for that matter. But to make it simple, this is the reason why all this works. All this happens, In our mind, we process language learning when we still do not speak a language well. So we're not talking about our native language, we're talking about foreign language. We use what this part of the brain, which is called prefrontal cortex. This is this is how we think consciously, how we plan things when we try to retrieve words, when we try to think about grammar, etc., etc. Then we have another part of the brain, which is called the limbic system, that has to do with, let's say, emotions. This is an oversimplification of how this works, but just to show you a metaphor of how, like, you have two competing, let's say, parts of the brain. One is trying to process, to think about words, to arrange them together, to think about grammar, and the other part, which is the emotional part, fights against this part. So if you're tense, and subconsciously, we walk into a conversation, whether it's with a tutor or with people outside, there's a level of tension that, unfortunately, where the amygdala is involved, and not only the amygdala, that keeps this part of the brain, let's say, keeps it from communicating well with other parts of the brain. So imagine that this part of the brain wants to grab a word somewhere, fetch a word with a mechanical arm, but the other part just keeps it from doing that. If you're stressed, if you're anxious, if you walk into any conversation with the idea that you're going to be judged and everything, all the negative things that you think concerning a conversation, this is bound to happen. This has happened to me a number of times recently. Just to give you a very concrete example, I've been learning Serbian for 2 years. I had a conversation with my colleague who's Serbian American, and I've been learning the language for 2 years. I understand it pretty well. We recorded a conversation for YouTube. I could not say the simplest things. Like, he asked me, "Are you ready?" I was like, I couldn't even say, "Yes, I am," in Serbian. And I realized, how is that possible? And because the knowledge is there, but it's blocked. So it's something that happens all the time. Our mind goes blank because we are anxious and we are in this mode, in this very negative mode. My suggestion is, once again, what I said before, is that to establish, if you're anxious about having a conversation with a native speaker, find one person, a friendly person, not necessarily competent, a friendly person. You are really excited. You think, "Oh, I'm going to talk to Jennifer or Luca or Mark about whatever excites you." And when that happens, when you focus more on the communication than the performance, your level of stress is going to go down, and then your mind will go blank, because this is inevitable. It's a background noise that you're not going to eliminate, but it's going to happen less and less when you're talking with that person. If that happens, there's another simple thing you can do, is like, you can just say, I'm trying to say this word. If the other person speaks your Spanish, for example, you can, either say, "I don't remember how to say this word," and be very honest, or smile or look at on the fly. But just be honest first with yourself and then with the other person. Once you establish with one person, again, a friendly communication, like a collaboration, then your stress levels will go down, and you will be able to manage this conversation much better. And that is going to give you confidence. With that confidence, you're going to walk into another conversation, and then another conversation. Remember, every time you have another experience in a foreign language, so every time that you walk into a grocery store to ask something, or you buy a train ticket, that's a new experience. It's old because you lived it in your own native language, but it's new because you've never done it in your foreign language. So a little bit of a level, like the level of stress is going to be there. You're going to think, "Oh my God, I'm just going to mess this up. It's going to be a disaster." Once you do it, you realize no big deal, and then your confidence is going to grow step by step.
Well, you shared a lot there, but I think for my students, just understanding that it's how their brain works. It's normal, it's natural. And thank you for sharing that you still have that experience even today. I'm sure that made all my students feel more confident. And it's just building up those successes, getting those successes in a comfortable environment that will allow them to build their confidence slowly over time. Great advice. Thank you. And I feel like we could talk for so long about these topics, especially diving into how our brain works. That's so interesting. And I know you have more videos on your YouTube channel. So why don't you just share with my students where they can find you on YouTube? What's your YouTube channel?
Sure thing. My YouTube channel is just Luca Lampariello, which is just my name. So if you write Luca Lampariello or Luca Languages on YouTube, you will find my channel. It's all about learning how to learn. I do have some videos where I speak multiple languages or other languages in just one video, but mainly it's about how to learn, how to use your brain to learn more efficiently, and to show you that that is possible and everyone can do it.
I'll put the YouTube channel in the description as well, so everyone can follow you, get those language learning tips and advice. Final question for you before we wrap up. If my students were to do only one thing this week to improve their English, what would you recommend that they do?
I would say to focus on the joy of actually whatever they're doing, whether they're speaking, whether they're writing, whether they're reading, whether they're listening, whether they're watching a YouTube video like this one, to have joy, to think about the joy of learning instead of I have to do this because I have to learn. It's more like I want to do this. I think that once again, yes, techniques and strategies, they're important, but this mindset shift that you need to have in order to take things further is one of the most powerful things and factors when it comes to success in learning English or any other language for that matter.
What an amazing way to end our conversation. Focus on joy. You heard it, everyone. Focus on joy. Thank you so much for being here, Luca, and sharing these amazing tips and advice.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
More amazing advice for you. Let's put thanks Luca, show our support. Let's put thanks Luca in the comments. And now I'm excited because you're going to hear from a fellow English learner. You're going to hear from Mustafa, who started learning English as an adult. And he went from zero, no knowledge of English, to fluent, communicating his ideas confidently in a short period of time, and he's going to share the exact study routine that helped him achieve success. Let's hear from Mustafa now.
Welcome, Mustafa. It's so wonderful having you here.
Hey, Jennifer, how are you? Thank you for inviting me.
I'm doing great. Absolutely. So why don't you tell everyone, when did you start studying English?
Okay, it was back in the day in 2020 when the COVID-19 hit the world. I started, learning English from scratch, from zero. And at the beginning, I had a teacher, but after 2 months, I started studying independently. So yeah, it was in 2020.
Okay, 2020 from zero.
From zero.
And at that time, what motivated you to start learning English?
Well, first of all, English is a dominant language. Yeah, once we started speaking fluently, we will have an opportunity to connect with the world and have a wide connection network. That's what really motivated me, talking to people from culturally diverse backgrounds. So yeah.
And in this short period of time, 2020, when you started from zero, today, what would you say your English level is, or how would you describe your fluency in English?
In terms of the IELTS exam, which is quite popular in many, many countries, I got a band 8 at the beginning of last year, and speaking it was like 8. But I would say I have made a lot of progress since then. So I would say it's pretty high. You could even say like I've reached the proficiency level, but it's still, hey, there is still a room for improvement. It's a lifelong learning. I cannot say I'm professional. It will never be. And it's all about learning continuously. That's what I think.
That's so true. And I say that to all my students, and I let them know that even I'm still improving my communication skills, and it is truly a lifelong process. So why don't you tell my students how you achieved such a high level of fluency in a short period of time? Did you have a secret process you followed, or what was your approach? What was your methodology to get these results?
Well, first of all, before embarking on this beautiful journey, I started eliminating all unnecessary distractions I had. First of all, social media. I only started using social media for educational purposes, like TikTok, not gonna happen. YouTube. Okay, let's use that for educational purposes, like watching YouTubers, like you watching professional teachers and so forth. That's what I did. And also I started eliminating like my toxic environment. At that time, I used to have a toxic environment. I told myself, if I wanted to improve myself, why not eliminate and eradicate all unnecessary distractions? So that's what I did. After that, I also created a study area, which was like putting over like vibrant sticky notes on my walls and jotting down beautiful expressions, idiomatic language, phrasal verbs. I've sent you some photos. You could show them like to students. You believe it or not, it helped me to study for 6 to 12 hours a day. I became obsessed with the process. I had a study table, I had a study bedroom, and I would like study continuously every single day. I spiced it up. I was not in a hurry to improve my language skills, but instead I enjoyed the process. I would visualize and picture my future. I would think about how many opportunities I would have if I reach this level. Okay, so let's study. So this is what really helped me to study, not only for many, many hours, but also to increase the quality of my language acquisition, I would even say.
It sounds like you had a very interesting approach, and obviously it kept you motivated for all those years. Now, you said you had to address your toxic environment. Can you explain, what do you mean by that? What did you consider toxic in your environment?
Yeah, I can elaborate on that. Like, imagine friends. Like, it would take me to say no to vacations. It would take me say no to like hangouts. It would take me to say no my friends. So I did have a toxic environment. Like, okay, let's go to parties. Okay, let's go to this and that. And I would have to say no to all of my friends because I really wanted to have a transformative change in my life. And then it took me to change my environment. And then you know what happened? I started surrounding me with educated and very high knowledgeable people. Like the people who would continuously improve their characters, the people who would continuously read books, the people who would continuously take their health seriously. And then I started feeling better about myself. All the elevated, complete emotions, positive emotions started coming to my life. I started feeling better, but before that, I was not. So it turns out I was being in a toxic environment. I mean, going to parties, doing this and that. But right now, you have no ideas. You have no idea about my environment. It's so clean. So for 4 years, I've been surrounded by very highly knowledgeable people. And I'm proud of myself, proud of my decision I made back in 2020. Yeah.
It's not an easy decision to make, for sure, when you want to make those positive changes in your life and you realize that you have to look at all areas of your life. So yes, you want to improve your English, but you had to look at your social life, your other habits in your daily life and how that impacted your studies. So it's great that you were able to do that. And you also mentioned that you visualized your future, you visualized the results. So when you saw yourself in the future as a fluent, confident English speaker, do you mind sharing, what were you doing? What were you doing with your English language skills in this visualization process?
Yes, we all go through ups and downs, but mostly downs. Life is not an easy path, so especially studying for 6 to 12 hours a day continuously without stopping, like without taking days off. At that time, I would picture myself in the future because I want to be somebody who could, like, I wouldn't say it's motivation, but I would love to say it like encouragement. I would love to encourage thousands of young people like me, because at that time I was isolated and I did not have somebody to like encourage me. You know what? It was all about internal encouragement, internal motivation. So I want to be somebody that would share my knowledge with the world and who will be able to encourage thousands of, if not millions of young people, because nowadays many of young people are losing themselves in mindless activities like spending hours and hours on social media. So I would visualize my future and I would feel a lot of positive emotion and I would study for hours and hours. Talking about speaking, I would sit in front of the mirror and talk to myself like for 24/7, which is an exaggeration, but that's what I did. Drinking a cup of coffee and talking to myself is something that really helped me to increase the quality of my speaking. Yeah.
That's amazing that you did that. And I say that to my students all the time when they say, "Oh, Jennifer, I don't have anyone to speak with." I always say, well, you don't need another person. You can open your mouth and just speak. So would you say that was a large part of improving your speaking skills? And what else did you do to improve your speaking skills? Because this is an area that my students struggle with the most, their speaking skills.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to say something. People judge our language skills based on our speaking skills. Nobody's going to come to you and check your grammar. Nobody's going to come to you listening, reading, writing. They are extremely important, but the most important part is speaking. The pronunciation, talking beautifully, having communication skills, being able to talk with people in a respectful manner. That's the case, and it really motivated me. Yes, agree on. I used to talk myself. I did not have a partner because, as I had mentioned, I isolated myself from social media. How I was supposed to have a partner without being able to active user of like social media. So I would sit in my bedroom and I used to talk to myself like a lot because I enjoyed the process. I created a study area. And I really liked it. Language should not be complicated. It should be interesting. It should be something that people enjoy learning. Yes.
And Mustafa, you've achieved such a high level of fluency, but I do want to ask you about this 6 to 12 hours a day, because that's a very long time. And I'm going to assume that my students watching this don't have 6 to 12 hours a day to study English. So how would you recommend that students who only have 1 hour or less a day can get real results with their English?
Well, we all think that we don't have time, but we have. On the way, when doing some ironing, when washing clothes, when washing the dishes, when we are eating something, we all have time. We could passively listen to something. That's what I used to do while doing ironing, while commuting to somewhere. I would listen to podcasts. Well, not specifically podcasts, but I would watch films. I would watch movies on the way. So by doing this, I would at least spend 2 hours passively listening to something in English. So we have time. So if somebody has like 1 hour, I think that person has to do some analysis. Do I have some time on the way? Do I have some time while eating? Because to some extent you have to be a bit selfish when educating yourself, instead of instead of having lunch with your friends and gossiping. Be a little bit selfish, listen to something in English, and have your dinner or lunch like studying. Because look, once we become educated, once we become highly knowledgeable, and then we will start educating others. So it's okay to be selfish to some extent. Yeah.
That's a very good point. And for myself personally, it takes me about half an hour to do my hair and makeup in the morning. And it takes me about half an hour to prepare my lunch, eat, and clean up after my lunch. And I always make sure I do something educational, listening to a podcast or training on a specific topic during that time. So I'm able to learn and develop for 1 hour every single single day that would have just been wasted time because I'm just doing my hair and makeup or eating. So it's a really smart strategy to find wasted time and turn it into productive time. And why don't you share a little bit about your sleep schedule? Did you have to wake up earlier or go to bed later, or how did you incorporate your sleep schedule with your learning schedule?
Oh, I had a very healthy sleeping schedule. I would go to bed at 8:30 p.m. around that time and wake up at 4 a.m. or 4:30 a.m. So I had a very healthy sleeping schedule. And then after waking up, I would immediately take a cold shower or go for running, because that really helped me to feel fresh before studying. And I would absolutely drink a cup of coffee. That's what I would do, because it was quiet. I would study in silence. Everybody was sleeping, but I was developing myself. This was also one element which helped me, get motivated and study continuously, waking up earlier than everybody else and drinking coffee and starting my studies. Yep.
Well, it sounds like you found many different ways to add learning English to your daily routine. So that's great. Now, one thing I hear from my students a lot is that they've been learning for years and years, and they feel like they've gained a lot of vocabulary, gained a lot of grammar, but when they go to use it in a conversation, like we're having a conversation right now, their mind goes blank, they forget all their words, they're shy, they're nervous, and they're not able to communicate. Whereas right now you are communicating very successfully. So did you struggle with that? How did you overcome that? And how would you recommend that my students who are experiencing that issue can overcome that as well?
Well, there are two ways. Like, there's a passive vocabulary and there's an active vocabulary. Well, in terms of active vocabulary, I learned vocab, as I had mentioned, by jotting down a lot of beautiful expressions and putting on my wall and deliberately practicing them. What I mean by that, I would sit in front of the mirror and I would take expression. Let's say people have different likes and dislikes. That's one, the expression, yeah? I would flexibly use it. Like, people have different likes and dislikes when it comes to reading books. Yeah? Some people like different types of genres, while others like different types of genres. So by using great language chunks and deliberately practicing them in front of the mirror, I was able to actively use my vocab. And it's okay to forget vocab. It's okay. It's all about the process. And it also comes down to confidence. Look, people should not be very shy in front of people, because everybody's going through something. Everybody's learning this language. How can you be shy when learning language? It's very bad. So you have to first of all tell yourself, hey, everybody's going through. It's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to forget vocab. And it's okay to feel embarrassed from time to time. And in this way, you build confidence. That's what I used to do. I went through a lot. It's not okay. It's not easy to wake up at the same time, go to bed at the same time. It was not easy to study for 6 to 12 hours a day. It was not easy to feel embarrassed when I was giving lectures. It was not easy. But by learning from my mistakes, I learned. And I am still learning. I sometimes cannot use vocab, but that's okay. It's, as I had mentioned, it's a lifelong learning. So yeah.
So you embrace the fact that mistakes are normal, you expect mistakes, and you actively practice, and through that practice, you're able to gain confidence. Now, imagine if a student watching this could only do one thing this week to improve their English fluency. If they could only do one thing, what would you recommend they do?
Listening and speaking are connected. They are both connected. The more you listen to something, the better you get at speaking. But it doesn't mean the fact that you shouldn't speak. You have to speak. And I'm 100% sure that student has time. On the way, you could talk to yourself. If you are feeling embarrassed, just put on your earphones and start talking so that people know you're talking with somebody. Yes? Before going to bed, talk to yourself. But what I mostly recommend is listening to something that you are actually interested in. As I had mentioned, listening, speaking are connected. I used to watch movies. I used to watch TV series like Friends. Yep, like 10 seasons. I used to watch Friends like for hours and hours. And I was even like, I even forgot the time was flying, you know? So I watched things based on my curiosity. So once again, listening and speaking are connected with each other. They are not too academic. You don't have to study a lot of grammar. You don't have to sit down and do a lot of tests. The more you listen to something, the better you get at speaking. But also talk to yourself.
Very great advice. Thank you so much for sharing your story with everyone. And why don't we end by, you can tell everyone, what are you doing now with your English fluency? So now that you have achieved these results, what are you doing? How are you using your English skills on a regular basis? And also please share how my students can connect with you.
All right, so right now I'm doing a lot of teaching online. I'm about to start my own YouTube channel, which is going to happen this year. But right now I'm doing a lot of teaching online on Telegram. If you search IELTS with Mustafa, double F in Mustafa, you can find me. Apart from that, we have started a very gigantic project teaching over 500 students in Uzbekistan. It's both offline and online. That's what we are doing. And recently, I made a visit to Arabic countries like Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Believe it or not, my language skills, oh my God, helped massively. I was able to have a wide connection network, talking to local Arabs, talking to millionaires. I'm gonna tell one story. There was a man sitting in a hospital. So I struck up a conversation with him. Hey, how are you? Can I have a talk? I'm from Uzbekistan. So by showing my emotions, my intonation, I was able to talk with him and get his number. It turned out he was the CEO of the company which manufactures robots and motorcycles. What I mean by that, the better you speak, the more connections you will have. So right now, I am working on myself in every possible way, doing a lot of teaching, preparing for my uni, and so yeah.
Well, that's so inspiring. And I love to hear how you're not just an English learner, you're an English speaker. You're out there, you're talking to strangers. You approached me to have this interview on my channel. You're using your English, you're using it to gain connections, to interact with people, to learn. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it will motivate and inspire all my students to keep going, keep pushing to improve their English skills. So thank you again, Mustafa.
Jennifer, thank you for having me. And I am 100% that it's going to pay off. If students work on themselves, it's going to pay off. It's really going to be successful. After 50, 60 years, they are going to look back and smile. So thank you. Thank you so much.
So much advice for you to put into practice. Let's say thanks Mustafa in the comments below, and make sure you put all this advice into practice. And if you like this video, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. And I have another interview with more advice for you. You can watch it right here.